Good morning, everyone. This is Petter Salin at Technical Transcuts, being your host today for continuation on the webinar series on global medical device development. Today's topic is quality and how to build quality processes into the product portfolio and the new development projects and the device backbone. And this is triggering events such as audit findings or non-conformances, and connecting these with complaints or inquiries, making sure that if required that they're channeled to a CAPA with the appropriate actions in order to channel a modification of our designs into the change process, and of course to have effectivity on the complaint and CAPA. So this is the topic, and we will it connects to some other topics, of course, both previous sessions we've had on document management, but of course also the immediate topics which we have as part of the CAPA, for example, the change effectivity and engineering change management, as well as hazard management and risk management, which is a topic which we will look into in more detail in coming sessions. So before we get started, I want to highlight that the previous sessions we've held, and of course also this session, will be available on our website under events, where you have the link to the medical device webinar series, and you have movies to all the previous sessions and all upcoming sessions. And we usually have the recordings available at lunchtime at the day of the webinars. So if you don't have a possibility to attend the live session, you can always visit the webinar series, go to the movies, and replay them from the website. So, quality processes. As mentioned many times before, the core functionality in PLM and the device development backbone, it spans the product definition, it spans document management, as in this case, the definition of a requirement spec, and the stage gate process, and that's usually scope of implementation in most of our implementations. Quality processes, some have chosen to implement a complete suite for handling quality. Some have selected just parts, specific sub-processes. So we will cover and highlight what's been implemented, of course, in production. Also, we've done some modifications, and some of you might have seen the quality processes a few releases back, say 13x or 14x. What I will show today is based on the 15x release. And of course, there are some modifications with regards to both complaints functionality, adverse event reporting, and the CAPA processes. I would say the big change is in the CAPA processes, but also some essential updates both on complaints and audit functionality. So to provide the background for what we keep in the PLM backbone, it's a model which covers the stage gate process with a project model with tasks and resource allocation. It's the product definition for the medical device on its highest level, which includes essential reused items such as intended use, such as essential requirements. It also covers the top-level assembly or top-level assemblies for several subsystems or a configured product. For regulatory purposes and for example, for the quality aspect or safety aspect, and safety reporting, we do have the product family definition, which is referring to the technical file, but also can be linked to relevant complaints and recalls, for example. Also, from the product is the link to the sales item, and this is the device delivered on a specific market. And of course, this can access a top-level assembly as well. So that's the core, and as we've stated many times before, what we do when we implement PLM is to set up a proper product definition from initial idea up until regulatory release. We combine it with the skills and competences we have in the organization and an appropriate project organization, matrix organization, to be able to handle the interplay between products and projects. And of course, we need to implement the different processes according to our setup for the QMS. And this often includes complete setup of a stage gate process with different gate reviews and the complete model for design controls. When we do this, we establish a completely cross-functional and virtual organization, which is easy to roll out on a global basis, and it scales very well with the growing organization. So it's easy to add new products to the product portfolio. It's easy to transfer development to new development centers, R&D centers, and new manufacturing sites, assuming that we have the proper core skills at these new locations. But it really provides the global foundation for medical device growth. When doing so, we set it up as a validated system. So we define these processes and the systems in line with the basic QSR requirements, both for the MDR as well as FDA requirements. And of course, we need to meet the basic Part 11 and Annex 11 requirements for electronic signatures. But we do have a good foundation for that. Often we implement regulatory processes. So this might be submissions or the UDI processes. It might be the submissions for safety reporting. But it also spans the routines for declaration of conformity and product compliance, as well as the detailed implementation of product compliance requirements. When we do this, and whenever we store a product, we store it in a context, and the context of targeted markets, which really defines how we are to approve this. If it's a certain medical device class of the device, then we know what kind of routines we are to set up for that device. What kind of approvals are required, what kind of deliverables are required if we, for example, intend to release a standalone software application in a particular market. Also, when we create any specification or any document, whether it's a CAD drawing or a CAD 3D file or a part specification, strict document, we store those in the context of the product, and we will reuse the definition of the product with effectivity, with withdrawal rules directly from the product, if it will gain how we can administer our specifications. So that's what we do, and of course, with regards to quality, we want to reuse this information, and therefore, since 95 2004 or so, we implemented the quality processes as part of the Innovia suite. And since then, it's also been introduced in the out-of-the-box standard template for medical device development within Innovia, or the 3D Experience platform, which is called License to Cure. What we track are different, for example, different types of quality events. So these might be findings from internal, external audits, supplier audits. It might be incidents from deviations, non-conformances. It might be service requests, inquiries, and complaints, which are tracked in the field as product complaints on our products. And the important is that we establish routines which identify these incidents or these issues and channel them in a proper way and qualify them in a proper way so that we can make sure that we perform the proper actions if a safety routine or if a consignment or detailed analysis are required. So we need to understand what happened and why did it happen, and of course we need to categorize it to determine how should this incident be channeled through our organization. In order to do so, in order to understand what it is and why it happened, we need to perform an initial investigation, initial risk assessment to determine what's the likelihood of reoccurrence, how does it relate to our history, and what are the immediate corrections we need to make in order to secure that we have proper input for our analysis. How do we make sure that we have the proper input on the actual event which happened? Was there a patient involved, and if so, how was that patient affected? And then, of course, assume that we come to a conclusion that there is something which we need to do. We need to understand how does that potential analysis and implementation plan, how does that relate to our development or manufacturing resources, and how does it relate to a potential effectiveness? How will we know how it's validated and implemented? So that's what we need in our procedure. Then we might set up clearly defined preventive actions, corrective actions to determine how to handle it. And and of course, equally important, we need to understand how will this, assume that we need to do something, how will this change be implemented, validated, and effective? What's the acceptance criteria? How do we know that it's been properly taken care of, so that we can rest assured that we can close any complaint issue or CAPA? And of course, here comes a natural connection to the PLM backbone, where we today already keep a lot of the product changes. And what has happened in the License to Cure suite over the last few years is that the change process has been updated. I believe the new change process was introduced in 2013 or 12 or so. And one of the key purposes with that change process was to increase the scope to cover a wider set of changes. Also, what has happened is that the change process has been adapted to, of course, the changes related to the product portfolio, but also the changes related to quality documents and prescriptive documents such as SOPs. So today the change process has a much wider scope than just engineering changes, and that might fit very well with the quality procedures we have. Assume that we establish these processes and routines, then we establish the proper QMS backbone for identifying quality issues and analyzing and resolving and implementing potential changes based on those. What we want to do as part of the planning of the effectivity and then the execution of the change is, of course, to understand how does these quality issues, how do they relate to our development projects and ongoing engineering changes? Because, of course, we want to plan the implementation of any change driven by a complaint or a non-conformance to match the test and validation of already ongoing and planned and scheduled change activities. Additionally, we need to understand if we are to commit to this CAPA, how does it affect our other resource commitments? And do we have access to the cross-functional team, which we really need for a proper CAPA analysis? Additionally, we have often already the relevant data sources for the CAPA and complaints analysis in the PLM backbone. We've created that as part of the design controls and the initial setup of the DHF. And that's really how we want to reuse that information and connect previous information on hazards and hazard analysis and all the other data sources of the DHF back to the CAPA analysis and really put the tools for that analysis, for the root cause analysis, as well as the continued hazard analysis in the hands of the engineers who initially did the analysis, now which take it forward for product maintenance to make sure that we really build quality into the product portfolio. So that's the key essence why we address quality as part of the PLM suite. It's to build the quality into the product portfolio. So what might it look like and who's involved in those cases? It might go, it's rather typical is a cross-functional process, and an incident is typically captured in the field. It might be a complaint ticket which is registered at the hotline support. An important thing here is that we do have the proper inputs and qualification on the issue in the field to make sure that we capture the relevant information for a proper complaint. Now it seems the connection is back. Okay, so I will continue. And so the complaint is captured, and the first thing we do in the quality department is, of course, to consignment activities to make sure that we have received the item from the field, secured it, and made sure that we draw as much analysis detail out of that return sample. Additionally, we need to, of course, respond to the customer, potentially perform or provide some kind of compensation to the customer. But equally important is to trigger a detailed investigation. So this might be someone in engineering, of course, starting an initial brief detail analysis. Also, a safety lead or a regulatory lead might be required for the safety assessment. The system provides a decision tree tool to determine what kind of adverse event report is required for this particular device in this particular market. And it builds up the adverse event report form as a PDF or an electronic form, and populates that in the environment directly. When the first initial details have been completed, or as part of that, the team will determine will a CAPA will be required. And here we have a two-step process. This might either be a qualification on the CAPA request, or we go directly and set up the CAPA, initiate the CAPA. An important change for the CAPA is that today it's represented with a project, which means that it can have a rather well-defined set of tasks built up as a workflow, but you also have a good overview with the work breakdown structure of the different tasks, which you can edit, modify, and extend if you want to. Additionally, it's a tool which you can easily use to allocate resources. So you can check your CAPA with tasks and check them against the kind of skill sets you would like to use, and test it out for resource availability before you launch it, and make sure that you do have the proper resources and you do have the proper tasks defined before you submit it and start the analysis activities and planning activities. Once you've initiated the CAPA, you should have proper tools for the planning and the risk analysis. So assume that you've had and performed the risk analysis or hazard analysis on the product. Of course, you want to reuse that information and track, see are the issue which we've detected in the field, is that already represented in our analysis, and how can we reuse that information. Additionally, you might want to perform a more detailed root cause analysis or 8D analysis or whatever routine you're using for the detail assessment. And then you want to trigger, and of course, while doing so, you want to reconnect to the different data sources you have for your development. And all this you most likely then already have in your PLM backbone. Then you want to start the execution, and this is ordinary task management in the 3D Experience platform. This is done through a web client or a web client on a tablet or a mobile phone, whatever suits your way of working and depending on how you're accessing the system. And then, of course, for the implementation of effectivity, we're creating a change which is based on a complaint or a CAPA or a complaint CAPA template. So we're reusing the standard routines we have for change management. Of course, if we're already starting the change and planning the change with a connected complaint and CAPA, then we want to benefit from the change templates we already have for complaints and CAPA, and they're all immediately connected to that. So when I close the change and the change is effective, I also have a trigger on the CAPA and the complaint to make sure that they are closed. And I really have a good end-to-end closed-loop quality process. This is what we're implementing. Before going into the application, the implementation of the quality processes, it builds on several different parts. Of course, the core PLM backbone. Some organizations have implemented the quality processes very much standalone, not necessarily directly connected to the parts, and of course that can be done as well. It might suit a software as a service or cloud model, but often you want to have it in coordination with your document management routines, so you can connect really the core essence of the QMS or your electronic QMS with the PLM functionality, and really keeping one tool for document management, for parts engineering activities, as well as the quality processes, as well as the complete end-to-end quality processes. So that's one common implementation related to quality. Then, of course, we have the immediate change and QA processes with audits, non-conformances, deviations, CAPAs, and this functionality, which we'll look deeper into in just a minute. But then there's also quite a wide set of different quality aspects on the standard functionality in the PLM backbone. And this is just checking that the sound quality is good. I'll close this one for now. And this is setting up product features, setting up the basic routines for systems engineering and modularization. So really building in quality in the design. And this could for sure be a separate topic. Where it's related in medical devices, it's often related to the setup of your product or device characteristics to have close tracking between device characteristics and essential requirements, and keeping control on your test setups and your verification and validation routines. But it's also related to any quality aspect built into design procedures. How you track your features, how you track your functions, and how you communicate your functions in the PLM backbone. And this is a topic on its own for a separate session. Then we have test validation and calibration. So this is all the test and validation activities, of course, for product compliance, but also in general, and as well as the calibration routines. For the ongoing product maintenance, more recently, we are quickly moving or taking the 3D Experience platform closer to the shop floor. So a part of the test, validation, calibration routines is shared with the MES part of the 3D Experience platform and portfolio. So we have a few years back, 3 years back, something like this, Dassault Systems acquired the Aprecio MES system. And of course, since then, that platform is gradually integrated and added onto the 3D Experience platform. We have another separate field, which is supplier quality, which goes in parallel with the quality mechanisms, but it's a separate set of tools for supplier communication. And of course, it's highlighted also with the updated MDR, with the updated ISO 13485 standard, focusing more heavily on the supplier quality and supplier risk assessment, both covering collaboration activities such as supplier change requests and supplier change notices, but of course also focusing on how suppliers can provide the proper evidence, declarations of conformity, or manufacturing certificates for which are required for a supplier to be qualified. And it's all the functionality related to approved vendor lists and supplier qualification. There is a separate module for supplier scorecards and how that information is combined with the onboarding of new suppliers in our organization. Yeah, I mentioned the document management part. This has been covered in a previous webinar, so I will not go into depth about that functionality. But if you'd like to know more details, there was a webinar on this topic September 13, and you can follow that in detail on that webinar. But when it comes to the quality processes, it might start in issues and general capabilities to track complaints or any kind of inquiry into the change process. And there is good functionality to channel any kind of issue connected with your parts, your products, your complaints, whatever it might be in your organization, connected to a responsibility, and make sure that it's channeled properly through the organization. Once it's captured, you can qualify it further and convert it to other types. And in this session, we'll follow and track a complaint. I will log on to, let's do it properly this time. We'll log on to the system as David. David is a quality lead and quality manager, and this might be his default view when logging on. As you're now familiar with, I assume, you have the different applications in your Compass, and you could either start in this module or a CAPA module, whatever suits your analysis purpose. But assume that we start with complaints, and I filter on different complaints. Let's see what we have in process. Not much. Okay, so assume that I'd like to understand I was logged into the wrong environment. So here we have some richer examples. So now it looks a little bit better. if I'd like to understand my complaints, this is my initial view. And of course, here I can see recently logged complaints. I can sort this view on, say, severity, urgency, based on different parts on the product definition, depending on where I come from. And of course, I need to keep track on the cycle time to understand if we're late. And I would typically want to understand, have we launched the appropriate investigation, or am I still open on this? I have access to different dashboards for initial trending. And if I switch to the dashboard views, I can start with drilling down into my complaints, and from here launch the relevant complaint table as a different way to navigate my complaints and understand if it's a duplicate, and if so, how does it relate to different products. But let's start by creating a complaint, just to have an idea of what kind of information do we capture. Usually complaints are captured by a hotline organization out in the field, and there is a typical scenario. We read in the complaints not through this manual creation, but rather as an XML file transferred over from the CRM system, whether it's a Siebel or Salesforce or whatever we're using for our hotline. In this case, all the values here in red are mandatory. So the source information, what's typically come up over the last 18 months is to implement a scanning copy possibility, where I scan the ID on the device, say a DI or PI number, or its relevant encrypted code, read that information, and based on that, it identifies the device. Using type ahead here where appropriate. Important is that I get my experience code in sync. So I do the proper identification of experience and issue, so that I can do early detection of duplicates and early trending. In this case, we have an AED device, which we're using as an example all through this webinar series. AED did not launch when pressing start. So since in this case we might have done a scan, we would have had an automatic identification of the DI number, and if that's the case, it will also look up the product and product model, could potentially also look up serial number or model number, and I have then a very direct link to the potential data sources I want to use for my initial analysis. If a patient is involved, we're capturing that information. So in this case, so it's a young girl. We also want to track the reported details. And in this case, it was reported by Jenny Svensson at Karolinska. So I don't need to create anything else. I select done. And it takes me directly to the complaints. For the complaints, I can clean up the window a little bit to have a bigger area to track. I have the basic properties. Under the task tab, I can create tasks if I'd like to, or I can set due dates, as you might be familiar with in the 3D Experience platform. And I haven't set up any complaint team, so in this case, just to get started, I changed my setting there. So I want to include David as quality lead. I would like to include Karen as manufacturing engineer if required. I want to include Philip as design engineer, and I want to include Sean, safety lead, in this scenario. Please perform initial consult actions, fulfillment and returns. Okay, so I can either read these tasks from a template or set them up accordingly. And now I made a mistake in the assignment, so I create 4 tasks, 1 for each. So in this case, I'll clean up some of my mess here. For the different tasks and for the assessment, I typically work with this overall view, and you might be familiar with the filtering functionality and capabilities. So if I want to easily detect duplicates, for example, of a certain magnitude, just work with the filter. It will filter out those complaints which are of urgency or specific importance, severity. Also, what we've introduced recently with the introduction of both the CAPA module as well as the UDI functionality, we've added additional columns here, so you can easily do your trending based on much more narrow product definition than what you might be used to in the quality modules inside the 3D Experience platform or Novia. We have also the dashboarding capabilities. So we use these graphs in order to drill down on the relevant complaints. So assume that I would like to understand late complaints. I select on those which are late, and it seems I actually didn't have. I had 2 complaints in that category, and I can drill down into them into more detail. All these different dashboards are interactive, so I really use them to explore the complaints database we have on different severity and different parameters. And it also, of course, give a very good overview for management controls in order to trigger any decision. If I want to work on any of the complaints here, and if I want to drill down into any of the complaints, I have the standard collaboration tools, which you might be familiar with from TVCs working with either the change process or the EDMS functionality. So I easily can create a discussion thread on this complaint. Please review. So this is an alternative way to create a discussion thread related to the task we're setting up for consignment and initial analysis. Okay. Fine. So that's for the complaints functionality. You've seen what it might look like. If we go back to the complaints table here, we do have the different categories of complaints. So usually it might not be clear if you have a qualified complaint or if it's a service request or equipment service request, or if it's an inquiry. So you have all these different categories. Similar logic, of course, completely different purposes. But of course, they can all be input for a CAPA or a further analysis, and can typically be combined with the complaints assessment. From the complaints, and what we have done with regards to the complaint CAPA functionality is to merge them much closer together. So I can navigate from a complaint to the CAPA. As you might know, the CAPA and the CAPA request can be launched when you have qualified the initial complaint. And if you launch the CAPA from the complaint, of course, it's automatically connected to the complaint. So it's set up as a project, and therefore you have this status view. You also have a Gantt chart on the different tasks, and you can also have a burn down chart for your different iterations of the CAPA or the project activities. Under CAPA details, there are quite some enhancements. So you have the actual CAPA project set up with phases and gates and milestones, and you can have, as in this case, a gate review for the allocation of resources. So you have a very clear statement that yes, this CAPA should be taken up. This is the motive, and this is the checklist which we went through when we did the resource allocation. Assume that you create this from a CAPA request. Of course, you have the link back to the CAPA request, and you can see, okay, what kind of qualification did we do? What kind of source type did we have? What was the scope? We can see clearly that yes, part scope, it's related to a critical defect, and we set up the complete CAPA scenario. We have also the identification of data sources, and once created from the complaint, of course, if there are relevant complaints, they're automatically connected to the CAPA. We have also, in this analysis, we have identified some relevant non-conformances, which have already been tracked, and we've connected these as well as sources. If we would have had other CAPAs related to this, we would have set those up as well. Looking at the lower part of the CAPA details, we also have the effectivity, the root cause analysis, and risk analysis. Now, this CAPA hasn't gone that far yet, so the effectiveness is yet an open topic on how to be implemented and planned, or planned and implemented. But we do have started a detailed investigation, and here we have already launched a root cause analysis. It might also be that we have some other history external to our organization, whatever it might be. Then we want to just drag and drop documents into the CAPA. If we would have a Word document, for example, which we want to add, we just would drag it onto the web interface here on this drop files here area up here in the header, and we can there easily check in additional requirements which are referenced as reference documents and contents to the CAPA. But under here we generate the different root cause analysis, and we have a few examples here. We have let's have a different view on those. So we have a top level analysis, and we have the defect cause identified. I can navigate into the specific analysis, and here we have root cause analysis. It's still in early identification. Also that might have different approaches. It might be definition of the factors, breakdown of sub-factors, if it's related to some specific information we already have. So we have a good tool for the detailed root cause analysis, and we can distribute this to different people in the organization, ask for their inputs and comments and ideas. Similar approach on the risk assessment, where we'll have different risks identified here under, and if we want to add additional risks, we just define this. So let's have a proper risk analysis on this one, and just define its hazard type, and add a description here. This risk analysis and hazard assessment can either, of course, if there is an existing risk analysis done on the product, we want to reuse that one. We want to add and have these tools for adding hazards and risks later on, and of course build on the previous information we have. And this one is then when we're taking it forward to the change, we're reviewing the product risk assessment based on this input separate on the CAPA. Okay. For the effectiveness, we have the standard tools for creating a CR. If I initiate the change from the CAPA, it's automatically connected to the CAPA, and battery fail. And as you might have seen in previous session on this webinar series, now we have we can assign this CR to responsible organization. That's fine. If we look under the optional tab here, we have different categories of change, and when initiated from a CAPA, it will read the CAPA and complaints definitions, and based on this trigger specific events if required for the change. Typical things which are identified are the change templates. So will this be what kind of change template to use for the CAPA complaint, and what kind of approval is required if it needs to go through a specific route. Perhaps it will set up specific change actions for the quality topics and for the CAPA, so that those can be approved separately by a quality lead. And it might use specific resource template with priorities for the planning. Okay, won't launch the creation there. With regards to the planning of the CAPA, there are functionalities for the different tasks, of course, setting them up, adding deliverables, setting up reading in the templates. And in this case, we can see that, yes, we've started the initial investigation and launched the action plan. So we have really set up the activities for this session. When doing the planning, if I switch to the planning view, I can even better the, let's see, the effort view. We can see what kind of effort is required, what does it mean with regards to details. And if I switch to the allocation view, assuming that I have resource allocation as part of my project setup, I can do my assignment of the different tasks here, and based on that, I can check the allocation of my different. Let's see. Yeah, there you can see. So I can set the allocation and resource allocation. See, okay, Kathy, manufacturing engineer, she is already allocated 30%. This is what I have available for her for this specific task for this given time period. So I have a pretty good tool to assess the resource allocation for the CAPA. Okay, I think given the timeline for this, I've provided a pretty detailed view of functionality. To summarize, what you've seen is a functionality for complaints and CAPAs. You've seen some of the functionality for trending, the basics for reviewing quality incidents, the different steps which are supported in a typical end-to-end process. We looked at the CAPA details, setting it up as a project, doing root cause analysis, risk analysis. What we haven't done, though, is to look at the product, because on the product we have specific tabs for quality. So when you review a product, you can see if you have recalls, you can see if you have complaints, and those are visible on the product level. Potentially, if you track quality issues on the lower level, you could have your NCs, for example, on part level, where it makes sense, and on DI level. Assume that you're a regulatory user, you would like to understand what does this mean. What's important on the CAPA is the connection back to the risk assessment. So you can work with the CAPA and see what's the residual risk. This is all the standard risk analysis capabilities on the product, which you might know from the standard DHF functionality and the support for ISO 14971 risk analysis in license to cure. And that's more specific functionality for risk handling and resolving residual risk and tracking that, which is quite powerful. We didn't look at in detail on the audit capabilities. There we've done some enhancements, for example, to be able to schedule your audits in a more efficient way, creating Outlook invites for your different audits. For NCs, we've done enhancements on the tracking of NCs at the dialogues for creating MCs. For example, if you stand on an SOP or a work instruction and you want to trigger an MC directly from that procedure because there are deviations or issues with following the procedure, then you automatically connect the NCs on the SOPs, so they're easy to follow up. Also, we saw an example where we had a connected NC on the CAPA to define them as data sources. So why do we do this, and why would we want to do it as part of the 3D Experience platform? It's of course to define the quality findings directly in the context of the live product definition. It is really built on what's known on the product, on the parts right now. The effectivity relies on the engineer and change process for that effectivity. So it's all live data, and the trending decisions are made based on product information. For many organizations, they already use 3D Experience Platform or Innovia for their engineering processes. So it's an application which is already known. So a user interface, the search logic, the table views, etc., all that is already known for the regulatory engineers or the engineering teams. Same is true for the change planning and the change control functionality. And then it's of course to have the end-to-end process, really have the details and connecting back from the CAPA to the design sources to the DHF and the DMR. So that's all for today. For the next week's session, you will have traceable requirements. So we'll go into the details of risk and hazard analysis, and we'll look at what might this look like and how does it work in CATIA version 5 and CATIA version 6, and of course the latest 3D Experience release. Thank you very much for attending today, and with this I close this session. Thank you. Bye for now.